I'd like to thank you all and Jais, who unfortunately had to leave, for the very interesting presentations. I think and the presentations were on transformation in practice. I think we started on what I would call maybe a systems perspective. Liam, you also talked about carbon pricing, about intelligent farming, how can we address the agricultural and farming perspective. We had a presentation on the food production by Jais on food production and especially the meat-based food production. Then we talked about the food waste and the societal movement that Selina, you have been part of. And Sophie, you gave us the young people's perspective. And I think also very inspiring, the young people entrepreneurship, which we actually see across the world, very many places where young people are engaged, they wish to create change, and they do that in various ways, as you also explained very well. And I think what we discuss quite a lot in Denmark at the moment also, or many of us experience as parents, is that it is really, not just as parents, but also as university leaders, as responsible for lots of what's happening at the moment, is that many of our young people actually ask us to take action, ask us to change things. They want to change diets at home. We have to find new cookbooks when we prepare dinners at home. And I think that is actually part of what's happening at the moment also. So from the systems perspective to the more individual perspective and the societal change that you have worked with. Now, when I looked at the title of the conference today, it's Transforming Global Food Systems Under Climate Change. We've talked about that. But the subtitle is Achieving Zero Emissions. How are we going all the way there? Do you have any remarks on that?
Me?
The panel? Who would like to go first?
Yeah, well, I mean, I think I tried to elaborate on my part, which was by nature of my role working with farmers on the production side. A lot was focused on supply, and I think there's a tremendous amount that we can do in the agricultural space with, again, carbon sequestration, the right carbon sequestration practices that are standardized, and incentivizing farmers to do that, that we can get towards zero emissions. That's one part of the equation. And the other part of the equation is the demand part of the equation, which Selina was talking about, which I think is heavily influencing then avoiding waste to begin with, thinking more in a circular economy way. And I think we got to tackle both angles. If you're only tackling the one or the other side, it's not going to be a sustainable solution. So I think for me, this is the key thing is that we take a holistic approach that takes into account the realities of the supply side, but also the opportunities that tackling the demand side can create.
Sophie, Selina, do you have?
Well, exactly, and I would want to add up on that, that we work very closely with the Danish Food and Agriculture Council. Actually, Klaus Jørgensen from the Danish Food and Agriculture Council was the first in Denmark to start making numbers on food waste, and he inspired me to start the movement. That being said, Danish Food and Agriculture Council has published a survey last year where they're asking consumers, the climate change, what can you do, your personal, what can you do to fight the climate change? One of the most top 3 popular things is to stop wasting food. Yay, good. So this is, what very tangible. People can really, it's a really tangible thing to see. You can save money, you can save time, you can save the planet. Now, about the young people. We are publishing a survey very soon, and it's not out yet, so I'm just going to break a little bit of it. We asked the young people about, are they concerned with the climate, and they says yes, very much. And then we ask, a lot of, people in Denmark, old ones, young ones, who are the ones who are wasting more food? The young people. So they are the people who are the most concerned about the climate, and they waste most food. So it doesn't add up, doesn't it? And then you see, Roskilde Festival, all the young people who are staying there for the climate demonstration, and then them go on Roskilde Festival, all the other festivals, and they just throw all the stuff away and walk out from it. So how do we deal with that? Your turn.
Well,
I think it's important not to lump all young people into the same bracket. I'm sure there's a few that are not part of the climate change movement who don't recycle or eat sustainably or responsibly. But what I think is really interesting is that the farmers who are actually in agriculture and are achieving zero emissions live in the most low-income countries already. It is the farmers that are in the high-income countries who are emitting the most emissions. And when you talk about using technology to enhance agriculture and achieve zero emissions, I think it's important to remember and to keep in the back of your mind is that this technology must be accessible. There's no point in creating technology that is going to be expensive and farmers can't use. And also, the Eat Lancet came out with Lancet Commission came out with a really interesting paper last week on the comparison between countries emitting the most emissions and how they are supporting young people and young people's futures. So if you look at the highest emitters, which are the high-income countries, not all of them, Denmark is doing quite well, but a lot of them, their youth futures are actually quite secure and are in the green. And the countries who are emitting the lowest amount of emissions, their youth's futures are in the red and really, really low. So it's bridging that gap, and high-income countries were doing something wrong. And that needs to be changed and challenged, and there's definitely more room for cross-sectoral and cross-country learning to achieve zero emissions, I think.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. I think Jais isn't here, but he also mentioned some numbers on the improved efficiency in our agriculture over the past several decades, and maybe you also have to add to that, Liam. But it's what are your thoughts on that, Sophie? That you at the same time you have very industrialized production, which can also be very efficient in the high-income countries, and now you mentioned farmers, small farmers in the global south or in low-income countries, which have lower emissions, but we still need to produce food for all these people that will be on the planet by 2050, or growing numbers on the planet.
Yeah. It's a tough question. I'm not sure I can completely answer it, but if you look at historically with Asia's Green Revolution, there was an increase in fertilizer use, which had a devastating impact on the locals' health. I think Oxfam found a 75% increase in a really toxic a substance in local farmers' water systems in their wells, but it increased production of rice really, really highly and actually made Asia the heart of rice production at the time. So now when you look at Africa's Green Revolution that is currently ongoing, it's to learn from the past. And Africa is now using an amalgamation of genetically modified rice substance that is both Asian and African. But the trouble they're having at the moment is that Asia is quite flat. Well, the village and town that the Asian Green Revolution happened in was quite flat, and Africa is completely mountainous. So it's learning from that and learning from history and previous experiments and science experiments to ensure that production keeps on high, but people's health isn't diminished.
Yeah, I'd add to that. I fully agree with what Sophie said. I think, and it's interesting because Norman Borlaug got the Nobel Peace Prize because of the breeding advances that he made for wheat and rice. And he got the Nobel Peace Prize because it was estimated at the time that 1 billion people were saved from starvation because of advances in breeding technology. So that was the positive side of the story, that was the production side of the story. And then on the preservation side, clearly there was way too many inputs were used, fertilizer, but also other pesticides, a multitude of inputs were overused, and that had a very negative impact on the environment and ultimately on people's health. And that's this constant balance between getting the balance right between being able to feed people in a healthy manner and in a manner that's respectful of the earth. And that is the challenge that just keeps growing because more people come into the world every day, every year. I mean, we've net 80 million new people every year are coming onto the planet. They all need to live somewhere. They all need water. They all need food. But we don't have more land. We don't have more natural resources. So we got to do a better job of managing it. And that's the kind of constant conflict that we've just got to deal with in a much more better way going forward.
Yeah. Thank you. I think we should just take a few questions from the audience. We have a question here.
Thank you so much for your presentations. I'm a master's student at Lund University. And my question actually is for Liam. You talk about the great things that Bayer is doing with, carbon sequestration and these type of tracking technologies. But I guess my question also relates to the products that Bayer sells as far as the chemicals, because regardless, those still, get into the water and then emit nitrous oxide and these type of things. Is there a plan for Bayer to kind of transform the kind of products that you sell to go in line with your vision?
Yeah, thanks for the question. I would categorize, we categorize ourselves as an innovation company, and I would say we're technology agnostic. So we work across many different technology platforms, whether it's biology, biotechnology, digital, but also chemical, and we look at what works. What's safe, what's effective, what works in a given environment. And then we need to make sure if we have certain products that they're used in the right manner, in a safe manner. And we don't make a differentiation. It's interesting, a lot of people have a kind of an innate negative reaction toward chemistry. A lot of chemistry is just a synthetic variation of what is available in nature already. And rather than constantly taking it away from nature, it's often more efficient to just produce that synthetically, and you have the same reaction as if you had a natural substance, but you're not taking away from nature. So I think what's key is, particularly if you're thinking about something like chemical crop protection, this is, we would call it a method of last resort. First, you're going to use other practices, good agronomic practices. There'll be biological approaches to crop protection, but sometimes a chemical is required, and then that chemical needs to be the lowest dose possible. It needs to be safe, and it needs to be used in the proper manner. So I don't think there is a future where there's absolutely no chemicals. Exactly same in human healthcare, where I originally came from. People don't really differentiate between chemical medicine that goes into your body and biological medicine that goes into your body. You look at what works, is it safe, and you need to ensure that it's used in the right way from a compliance point of view. So that's the way we try and think about it. But I'm not, again, I would consider ourselves technology agnostic. And we're actually working, I would say, rather on a business model that is not focused on selling inputs, for example, chemistry, but rather the output, which is using as little inputs as possible. That's the way we think about it, at least.
Thank you. Do we have another? We have another question in the back. Yes.
Thank you very much. My name is John Porter. I'm a professor here at Copenhagen, and I was the main author of the IPCC chapter on food security, which we did in 2014. I've been trying to think what could possibly unify these discussions we've had this afternoon, and I think On the one hand, we have an idea which we need to produce more from less. That is the kind of mantra, I think, of what we heard from the gentleman from Bayer. If you produce more from less, it doesn't actually mean you're going to reduce absolute emissions. You may do it more efficiently, but it's not going to actually reduce necessarily absolute emissions. And so on the other hand, we've heard a lot about waste and the way that we can control the waste. And so the mantra may shift from being more from less to being enough from less. I think this is really the mantra that we need to look at in the future, is not necessarily more from less. Thank you, Andrew. I can see you nodding your head there. So I think and also from what we tried to see in the IPCC, I also was working on the chapter about mitigation, and I think that was the clear message that came out of that as well, that we need to think of a change of mantra from not just, we do need some efficiency increases, but that's not enough.
Yeah.
We do need to change the mantra, I think, from more from less to enough from less. Yeah. Thank you.
Can I just say I fully agree with that. I think it's a very important point. And I think we're coming from a paradigm where the goal was to produce as much as possible, ideally not overusing inputs. Clearly now there's a focus on using even less inputs, but the point of enough, I think, is important, and getting away from the just producing at any cost, I think is key.
And I think, looking at the clock, this was such a great punchline that I would like to end this session on this note, that producing enough from less, and invite you all for a coffee break. And I hope you'll be back in half an hour, 3:15. Thank you, and thank you to our panelists.